My first question would be, what took you from philosophy to music?
Well, I was in music before I was in philosophy. When I was 14 years old, I heard the bebop, Kenny Clark, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker. I also heard Stravinsky, Rite of Spring at that time, and the Fifth Brandon Concerto of Bach at the same time. And before that, I had heard only, the middle class favorites: Beethoven Fifth, Schubert Unfinished, Overture to the Meistersinger, Broadway shows, popular music. And it was like somebody had opened a door in a house and said, "Okay, 14 years old, here's another room." And I went in and I never left. But by the time I got to college, I went early. I was 16, and I felt, well, that was 5, Bartok was 6, I'm 15, I'm 16, I'm too old to be a composer. And I was very interested in the philosophy of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the later philosophy, where he asks a question like, how does a child learn the word mind? It's interesting. So I played drums on the weekend, and I studied music. I was a music minor. And when the time came to graduate, I was accepted at Harvard as a graduate student, but I just couldn't do it. And I had a teacher at Cornell, Professor William Austin, a musicologist and a pianist, and he said, you follow your ambition, you do what you want to do, you be a composer. And it was, when you're young, it was very encouraging to come from a really fine musician. And I went down to New York City and I started studying with Hall Overton, who was a protege of Vincent Persichetti at Juilliard School of Music and a very close friend of Thelonious Monk.
That's references.
And it worked out very well. And then I went to Juilliard, and then I went out to the West Coast and studied Luciano Beryl, and et cetera, et cetera.
Actually, it didn't affect the work very much at all because the piece was actually created on a 12-inch monitor next to my computer, and Steve was in another room, and we just conceptually knew that and we had done another piece. So we had worked, the other piece had multiple screens with musicians and singers placed between the screens. This time, because I was working with a new kind of computer program, which gave me a lot of flexibility, we knew it would be one very large screen, that the musicians and singers would be below that screen. And that was about as far as we went in our minds with the staging while we were working on the piece. We knew that we wanted the light of the screen to continue down to envelop the musicians and singers to make it kind of a piece. But then we just went to work on our own mediums, and the piece was constructed, kind of back and forth very tightly, small bits of time as we went along, and with meetings in which we knew what the content would be. And then we'd kind of separate, and Steve would write the music first, send me the music. I would have these photographic tableaus that I'd created, and then I would use certain things in the score to kind of animate those tableaus. And meanwhile, he'd be sending something new. We'd have a meeting, where are we going from here? And it kind of went back and forth like that, with no storyboard throughout the piece. It was just created as we went along. We had a general idea, but really we didn't even know the end of the piece till we got almost to the end of the piece.
I was asked to write operas in the 1980s by the Frankfurt Opera and by the Holland Festival. And I said, thank you very much, it's very flattering, but no. I don't believe in traditional opera as a form for myself. Bel canto is on stage, orchestra in the pit, it's not me. And to spend 3 or 4 years doing something you don't believe in is suicide. But then I would hang up the phone and I would think, this is crazy, there must be something. But there was nothing. 1988, I did Different Trains. I don't know if you know the piece.
On record.
Yeah, well, basically, it's taking pre-recording of speech, like the early tape pieces, It's Gonna Rain and Come Out in the 60s, only saying, okay, every time a man speaks, the cello plays his speech melody. Now, a woman speaks, the viola plays her speech melody. Violins become part of the train whistles. And a light went on in my mind as I was working with the piece. What if you could see the people and hear them and see the musicians on stage playing what they said? And out of this came, I went to Beryl and said, video artist who I respect enormously, would you consider working on a piece? This is a general idea, and the result was The Cave in 1993. And we thought it was successful, and a number of years passed, and she did her work, I did my work, and then a gentleman who had been the most significant co-commissioner, Klaus Peter Kehr from the Stuttgart Opera and the Vienna Festival, said, would you like to write a piece about the 20th century? In the mid-90s, everybody was thinking about the 20th century. So we said, well, let us think about it, and we said, and we started talking, and we thought, well, my father used to tell me, he was born in 1904, he said, I saw horses pulling trolleys up Broadway in Manhattan. I saw gas lamps on the streets of New York in 1904. I thought to myself, if you took a camera in a balloon of planet Earth in 1800, 1900, and 2000, the difference between 1800 and 1900 is enormous. But the difference between 1900 and 2000, unbelievable. The planet had changed. Why? Because of technology.
Right.
Then we thought, well, very abstract idea. We had been involved in technology. The first pieces that became known of mine were these tape pieces, It's Gonna Rain to Come Out. Beryl had done Dachau 1974, and Text and Commentary, the Castelli Gallery, the video installations. So we thought, well, okay, we need some kind of events from early, middle, and late 20th century. Hindenburg came to mind, because it was the first time there was a disaster with the film crew waiting there to take the pictures, because when 1937, and it's this enormous, huge thing with a big swastika on its tail, and it's burning in America. Very symbolic. That's why I had the dung 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 dung. The quote from Wagner is very intentional. The atom bomb is obviously maybe the most obvious piece of technology of the 20th century, but Hiroshima and Nagasaki are so huge, so obvious, we thought, can't do that. Bikini is interesting because, first of all, you talk to a younger person, you say, I'm doing a bikini, you say, you're doing a piece on underwear? They don't know. The bathing suit, that's bikini. It was after the war, it was the beginning of the Cold War, it was a test, it was a scientific test, poorly conceived. And it interfaced with people who had nothing to do with technology, totally removed from the Western world. It changed their lives to this day, to 2002. They still can't go home. So, interesting story. We didn't know what we were going to do for the third part of the piece. And in 1997, we saw the headlines, The Sheep is with Clun, and we looked at each other, we said, that's it. And that's a whole different story. That's about changing the human body. And
well, the interviews were done really at the very, very beginning of Dolly, before we started working on it.
You did them.
The interviews
Yes.
were done first. Yeah.
I'm holding.
Yeah.
How did the interviewees react to the project?
They haven't seen it yet.
Well, some of them have. Some of them.
Who saw it?
Let's see who saw it. Who saw it?
Nobody saw it. Nobody
Not
saw
yet,
it. No.
not yet.
'Cause we haven't been. Most of the interviewees were
Well,
in the
either
States.
English or American, but a lot of the people from MIT are coming, and some of the
To
people
New York.
from
It'll
England.
be in October, so they'll see it there.
But the way it was told to them, I wrote them a letter, and I said, I'm a composer, you may not know me, maybe you know me, and I'm doing an opera. You may wonder, why do I want to interview you for an opera? And I explained about speech melody, I explained about different trains, I sent them a CD of different trains. I said, you can hear what it is, do me the honor to do it. Some said no, some said yes. And the ones who said yes, we made the interviews. So, I mean, they knew that, it would be, not the usual interview. And they're very, very different kinds of people, as you can see from the interviews.
Yes.
But the idea, the piece she took from the archives, the National Archives in America.
For the first two acts.
So it's like,
Hindenburg and Bikini.
we make a joke, it's two tales and a talk.
Is there a relation between the musical progression on the piece and the use of color in the video?
In a little bit there is. You're going from black and white, completely black and white documentary.
No, but between the music.
Between the music? No, I don't think so.
No.
No.
I think basically what you have is that, from a musical standpoint, I mean, obviously the look changes. Each one is a period piece,
Correct.
shows the period. formally, there is a relationship. Hindenburg is allegro.
Not with the color, though.
No, not with the color. No, I'm talking just musically speaking. You know, allegro, scherzo, lento, allegro, if you want to put it that way, and a pause between each one. Or traditional, appropriate to that period in history. It was her idea in Bikini to make these blocks, first in the airplane, then on the island, then the American Navy, then back to the airplane, then back to and to go in a kind of cyclical meditation. That was her formal idea. And I thought, well, that's good, that's different than, it's moving ahead, historic, and a coda at the end when you see the palm trees. And for Dali, it's hard to say what the formal organization is. We were talking about it yesterday. I say that certain things come back, certain kinds of music come back, certain things that are said come back.
Actually, it's more governed by the progression of the conversation.
Yeah. It's really more.
Yeah, because that really does dominate.
Well, no, there are certain, I could tell you, I could bore you with the different formal kinds of music that come back. But it's like a free rondo. But very free. And it fits the period. In other words, it gets progressively more complicated formally to go with a progressively more complicated life that we're living.
And it ends on, would you like to play with our yellow tie?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Story. We showed the piece in the Spoleto Festival in America, and a Japanese guy who's has sponsored our group in Japan came over, and he was very earnest and very serious, and at the end of the piece he said to me, "What is yellow toy?" And I spent 45 minutes trying to explain, you know.
How difficult was it to congregate all these cultural institutions in Europe, America, to support this project?
That was Andrew.
Well, really, basically, the gentleman who was talking to this is Enzo Restagno, who's responsible for bringing it to Italy, and who was responsible for bringing the cave before that. Many of the people who co-commissioned the cave co-commissioned the Three Tales as well. Dr. Kerr, as I told you, Enzo Restagno here, Nelly Hertling at the Hebel Theater in Berlin, Josephine Markovitz at the Festival of Paris. I think the first time it was the South Bank Center in London. This time it's the Barbican, but actually Graham Sheffield was at first at the South Bank and then went to so it's, you know, it's people who had known my work and our work together, and who liked it and did it again. And in America, of course, the Brooklyn Academy of Music. This is our greatest venue.
This is, we could say, this is a moral reflection or an ethical exercise.
Mm-hmm.
How far could we say it's also a religious experience?
Well, I can't really comment on the experience, but it's certainly there's a religious undercurrent to the whole thing in the telling of the two stories from Genesis. One being the creation of man and woman together to have dominion over living things on earth, and the other being the story of man created from the dust of the earth, woman from the rib, two people in a much more humble relationship to one another, there to serve and to tend the garden. And those are two very different types of human beings, one of dominion, one of humility. And those two undercurrents are there as a kind of a foil for a kind of arrogance that sometimes appears in the creation of science, in this case, or in anything we do really, but in this case we are interviewing scientists. And I suppose it's making it a foil to those people in terms of how one deals with one's own intellectual and creative abilities. Is it the end? Is it the ultimate? Or is it another step along in an ocean of unknowable things that are known and then we can't know? And so it's saying that some people believe that science is the answer to everything. And we're saying, is that really true?
Richard Dawkins' position is very
yes.
strict. How did you select all these scientists? I mean, was there initially a broader selection then we can.
There was a much
No.
broader selection, actually. Well, we had a
No,
lot more
I-
interviews than this.
Yeah, we had many more interviews than we actually used, and I had to do I made up most of the questions. It was actually I was on your side of the camera, so I must have read 30, 35 books because I did not know about this stuff. I read Watson's telling of the discovery of DNA, which is very interesting human document about scientific ego.
Right.
And I read Dawkins's books. I read Rodney Brooks. Rodney Brooks is the guy who's the head of robotics at MIT. He built the Mars crawler that went to Mars. And his student is the lovely Eurasian woman who builds the robot. We have the Madonna and Child at the end. Sherry Turkle was the woman who wrote not What the Computer Does, but What the Computer Does to Us. She is a psychologist at MIT who works with children and robotic toys.
Yeah, that's her first book,
Not Life on Screen.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
No.
But she's very interesting woman, and we need such an investigation now.
And Bill Joy also.
Oh,
Bill
yeah,
Joy, he's a hero.
amazing. Yeah, he's
very,
really
very. His article was written while we were working on the piece, and I said, I got to interview this guy. He's now working on a big book on the same subject. You were very au courant with this stuff. You know it.
I read a lot.
C'est dommage. Anyway, I did a lot of reading, and then I felt I couldn't interview these people unless I basically took their books with me, and I say, you say here, blah, blah, blah. As a matter of fact, I said, look, this is so beautifully said. Please read it. So Ray Kurzweil and Richard Dawkins and Sherry Turkle sometimes are just reading. When she says 10-year-old said to me, she's quoting. Because they have le mot juste, and in an interview you want to get, and sometimes they say it so perfectly. So basically, the people who we interviewed, and Beryl is correct, there were other people who just weren't as interesting. And of course, the interviews were all long, and we only used little parts of them. But it was an education for both of us to find out what's really going on. There was the first two pieces, you see the effect of scientific development of different sorts. And in the third piece, we said, okay, well, who are these people? It's not made in the sky. Some people think, oh, science, it's like big science. It's it's Watson got money. He was fighting Caltech. He was at Cambridge. He wanted to make sure they came in first. It was a whole political thing. Science is people doing things that they get paid for and have political ability to do. And Marvin Minsky is up there at MIT with all these ideas. And these people are trying to change who we are. So I got an education, and I think the excitement of finding these things out is maybe transferred to the piece.
There was another thing I found very most curious in your piece. I mean, Beryl's work is high-tech thing. You mentioned the new software you used, but the music basically is technology.
Is what? No, but I'm using the slow motion sound.
Okay, that's true.
Frozen utter self, and
no
all the.
synthesizers, not
Excuse me.
no synthesizers at all.
No, synthesizers are old tech. I'm using samplers and I'm using computers to extenuate the thing. But I think this question comes up: how can we use science to criticize science or to comment on it? How could we not? If you are sick and you need an operation, you go to someone who had that operation and you ask them what happened. It was a good doctor. It's a better doctor. You're going to buy a new car. You go to a guy who has one. You don't go to someone, I don't know anything about cars. Oh, thank you. You want to know from someone who's gone through it. So if artists are going to make a piece about technology, the artists who will do it most interestingly are artists who've lived with it for a long time and have mixed feelings and some real experience, which they bring consciously, unconsciously to the piece. And we're two good candidates.
Well, my time is almost up, so
Well, somebody marches. Somebody's coming at 12:30. I mean at 1 o'clock. Okay. So look, so go in when they come in, you stop.
okay. That's so artists like you are also trying to change what's in us in a way.
With the bells, it's yours.
Well, I think that the nature of the technologies that we're working with are they're recording devices, both of us, and so to point the camera or the tape recorder on the outside world is part of working with this kind of technology, and we happen to be interested in kinds of things. So I don't know how much a work of art ultimately changes anything. Maybe it plants a seed in somebody, but it's what engaged us to make the piece. This is what interests us in our lives. So that's how I feel about
It's a
it.
kind of what Richard Dawkins called a meme.
No.
No.
I would say this. We spent most of this interview talking about the subject matter of this piece. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, if we haven't destroyed ourselves. You won't care so much about Dali, etc., etc. Other things will be important. If this piece is going to live, if anybody's going to care about it in the future, it's going to be the music and the video. Everything else doesn't mean anything. Nordic mythology, do you care? No. But Wagner is still performed. The opening of the Suez Canal, I can't even remember. Aida is still performed. So, the day it's new, the subject matter is everything. But tomorrow, the next day, Prima la musica.
Yeah, but people still talk about Oedipus Rex, and there's still certain
because they're great plays,
yes, but
and
also,
they carry the issues with them.
Yes, basically that's true. But the subject matter isn't completely for naught.
No, the subject matter is what gets our juices flowing. Wagner cared a great deal about his Nazi ideas, and he made great art.
What reactions did you get to this piece until now? I mean, both from the critics, from the public.
We had very, very good reviews in The Guardian and in The Independent, and the New York Times. The music critic didn't like it, and the theater critic did like it. Some people thought,
the music critic thought that we were being very anti-science, which kind of shocked us. And what was interesting is that it made us realize that any kind of questioning of science in the way that we did, in terms of the human beings who make science, what are their intentions? How, like Bill Joy, kind of questioning how fast we're going, and are there any controls or brakes and on us. He took a lot of flack from coming out like that with his article, Does the Future Need Us? Why the Future Doesn't Need Us.
Right.
So, that's definitely, that was shocking to me, to see how how science was a taboo now, almost as religion had been, and that's really fascinating to me.
I think she's right that basically, if I think back on the reviews, that the critics who got really angry, there was a German headline that said, God bravo, technology fooey. And there was another guy in South Carolina, a local paper, and he was incensed that we could question these people, because for him, science is the true religion, and you don't question it, or you're a heretic.
It's the religion of today's world.
That's what, yeah.
Yes, it is, but it's it is something that you do, but there are lots of ways of looking at scientific reality. Einstein didn't seem to look at science the way Richard Dawkins does.
Well, yeah, and Rodney Brooks says we haven't got it right yet.
Rodney Brooks is a great
So
scientist.
he has a perspective on the limitations.
I mean, he said we used to think of our brain as a steam engine. Basically, he's saying, okay, at this period in history, the most advanced technology is the telegraph switching network. So therefore, that becomes our brain.
Yes.
Later becomes an ordinary computer. But later becomes a more massively parallel computer. And whatever it is we do at the instant becomes a model for our brain. But history, I hope it doesn't stop. It could. But if it doesn't, then we're going to develop into other things. And the awareness of the humility that comes with an awareness of saying, Newton was right, But Einstein showed Newton was right only for a certain area of reality, and that there was a larger picture. And Brooks is the kind of person who's aware of that. Yes, I've done these robots. Yes, I have a good model, but somebody in the future is going to shed a light that I don't see, and that's okay because I'm still doing a good job. And thank you very much. I think that's a good human.
It should be, but science is.
Science is a wonderful human endeavor,
Yes,
and the medical part of it is saving lives. That's fantastic, but it can also bring a kind of hubris, which is dangerous. Everything is provisional, because we are provisional.
So, I was thinking about God. God's,
He's not provisional.
no, it's not provisional, but in your libretto,
Yeah.
There's one letter missing.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. What's the reason for it?
In Judaism, the names of God are treated in the third commandment. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. What that means to do is that whenever you run into a name, the videotape could be erased in the airport. The paper that you write it on probably is going to be thrown away. So you leave it incomplete. You don't write the full name. So knowing that probably it's going to be ripped up, it's a matter of showing respect in a practical way.
It's also not a noun. It's not an object.
Okay.
That's part of it too. It's nothing it's nothing we really know. It's outside of our ability to know. So therefore, how you write it is a bit mysterious.
Our understanding is partial.
That's very Wittgensteinian in a way.
It's also very human in a way. Okay. And Wittgenstein was very human in a way.
Okay. I won't take any more.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
Very
Thank you.
Hope I meet you.
So I hope we'll see you in November.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've never been to Portugal.
You've never been?
No,
Oh.
no. So I'm looking forward to this trip. Yeah.
We were at Gulbenkian years ago, and it was very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we played it at the Gulbenkian
Foundation.
5-6 years ago. Yeah, it's a long time ago. Anyway, we're looking forward to it. Hope to see you right after we go to Paris. Thank you for coming up here.
Well, thank you for receiving me.
Just check. Oh, you didn't get any.